I wanted to follow up the video I did a couple of days ago. I dropped a 40-minute video for you guys breaking down all of the tips and tricks when it comes to credit limit increases. We talked about JP Chase, we talked about Capital One, we talked about Apple Card, we talked about Navy Federal. I gave you guys a cheat sheet so you guys can just screenshot your phone or your computer so you can save that, right? 40 minutes. Make sure to go ahead and watch that if you didn't. But what's funny is in that video, there were two cards that I kept mentioning if you paid attention to that video. One of them was the Navy Federal, I believe, End Rewards card and how they graduated. And then the second card I kept mentioning about how good they were as far as the requirements to get them, the ease of getting credit limit increases. I kept naming Apple Card, Apple Card, Apple Card. And then literally the day after, right, the day after I dropped that, the Wall Street Journal, they dropped an editorial where they're breaking down that JP Chase, they're even closer now to acquiring Apple Card from Goldman Sachs. So within the next year, the Apple Card behind the scenes, who's running and who's going to be handling the underwriting and all that, is going to be JP Chase. That's what it's looking like. And what I wanted to do today is specifically, let's dig into this story, because a lot of the key tricks that I broke down in that 40-minute video, if JP Chase acquires Apple Card from Goldman Sachs, there's going to be a lot of changes. And my guess, right, I'm not an industry insider, but my guess is a lot of the tips and tricks that we're using to get high credit limits, no inquiries, I think that's going to change probably in the next 6 to 12 months. So let's actually just break down what's going on with that, right? So you can see on the screen, $20 billion in portfolio is going to be possibly changing from Goldman Sachs over to JP Chase. If you have an Apple Card, there are 12 million of you guys, right? You're using that card. Some of you guys not realizing that the bank behind that card is going to change on you, and the way they do business is probably going to change, right? So let's break this down, right? There's three players when you have the Apple Card. Apple is basically the brand partner. There is no such thing as the Bank of Apple, right? They're just the brand partner. They are who you see on the front end. Goldman Sachs, they're the issuer. So when you go and you apply for an Apple Card, it's not the Apple underwriting team that's making the decision. It's Goldman Sachs. They're the one that's lending the money. They're the one that's looking at your credit profile. And, pretty soon, within the next year or so, it's no longer going to be Goldman Sachs. It's going to be JP Chase. And I want to show you what the difference is. So first things first, who is Goldman Sachs? What are they doing in the storyline? They are known for being huge players on Wall Street, investment banking. Like, they're dealing with hundreds of $1 million companies, $1 billion companies. That's the ball game that they're known for. They play on a very high, large scale, right? What they wanted to do back in 2016, they wanted to get in on the consumer level, and they wanted to deal with consumers like you and me, right? But because of the 2008 crash, because of all of the anti-Wall Street sentiments that we've been seeing since 2008, they had a tricky time trying to get into the consumer level market. For the average Joe, they created Marcus, which was the first consumer bank, right? It didn't really go as well as they wanted. So in their head, they're like, okay, how can we get into the consumer level? What's going to be the best way to do that? And this is where they partnered up with Apple. So in 2019, they started to negotiate with Apple, and they basically said, okay, we're going to handle the money part. People trust Apple. Apple, you be the face of the brand. Us, Goldman, we're going to be the back end, right? And that's going to be our way to get in on the consumer level lending, right? So Apple was like, all right, cool. So in order for us to do that, in order for us to get into this relationship, you're going to have to agree to no annual fees, no foreign transaction fees, no over the limit fees, approved credit scores as low as 600, right? That's why so many of us, especially in the rebuilding phase of our journey, Apple Card is clutch. It has been clutch for several years, giving higher limits to people with fair credit or what could be considered subprime credit. So if your FICO score is 660 and below, according to banks, you're considered subprime, meaning you're the type of person that banks, they're going to be a little bit nervous before they give you the approval. They're going to be, sweating a little bit. But Apple was like, this is what we want in a partnership. And then Goldman Sachs says, all right, cool. All right, let's do it. I want to get in on the consumer level game. So again, they started with $0 in banking experience. And in those 5 years, Goldman lost about $1 billion. This is the reason why they're now trying to get out of the consumer game, and why JP Morgan Chase is like, all right, we'll step in and we'll take over what you guys couldn't do. So let's look at the numbers, right? Why is JP Morgan Chase even interested in picking up where Goldman, let's say, dropped the ball? We'll put it like that. There's 12 million active cardholders right now who have the Apple Card. The average balance is about $1,600. $20 billion in outstanding debt. So there's $20 billion that still needs to be paid back. And this is key. Subprime users, 34%. So a little over 1 out of every third person that gets the Apple Card, they're considered to be subprime, under 660 credit score. Most tier 1 banks, US Bank, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, those tier 1 banks, typically, they don't like to deal with subprime borrowers. Capital One is kind of, more friendly. Credit unions tend to be more friendly with subprime borrowers, right? That's what we always tell you when you're trying to rebuild your credit. Find your local credit unions in your neighborhood, because they're going to be more flexible with you when it comes to giving you approvals, higher credit limits, right? The big players, they typically don't want to do that because it's looked at as high risk, right? Compare that to JP Morgan Chase. Only 15% of their clients is considered subprime. That's why it's more difficult to get a Chase card. You got to jump through the 524 rules. You got to make sure your income, your DTI, everything that we explained in that last 40-minute video. Certain banks are more conservative. You hear me say that a lot on this channel. This bank is more conservative, so you got to get your ducks in a row. Or this bank over here, or this credit union over here, they're less conservative, so you can there's a little bit more wiggle room. This industry comparison is saying the same thing, but just in different words. JP Morgan Chase, they are way more conservative than Goldman Sachs and Apple, than your Navy Federals. Even look at Capital One, right? People love the Capital One Platinum card because Capital One, they're usually the bank that is very friendly for newbie credit card people. Get the Capital One Platinum card, right? It's usually one of the first cards people get on their credit building journey. And Capital One, they only have 31% of their cardholders as subprime. So that means there are more subprime cardholders of the Apple Card than there is in Capital One, which is crazy, right? This is more risk. Goldman is carrying way more risk. All right. So why does Chase even want to deal with this? So they're looking at it like this. $20 billion is less than 2% of JP Morgan Chase's portfolio. Right? We think of 20 billion like, oh man, that's this crazy number. JP Morgan is looking at this like, oh, that's light work. 20 billion is nothing for us. Like, we're a huge player. We are especially in the US, we are the hugest player in the consumer lending industry. 20 billion is nothing. All right, we'll take that. Even though there's still a lot of subprime cardholders, there's still 8 million who have good credit scores. So now what can Chase do? Chase can now cross-sell them and try to get them to get the Chase Sapphire Preferred, Chase Sapphire Reserve, get them into their business lending, right? Chase is like, come on, we'll take y'all. We'll take y'all. We'll work with y'all, because they know in the back of their head, they want to put you guys through a pipeline and sell you on other products. What else is attractive? Chase is now going to have access to the Apple ecosystem. I don't have to tell you how big Apple is. So now they're going to merge their brand with Apple, which is another huge juggernaut, right? And Chase is going to come in with better terms because they're coming in with more leverage. Chase is already a powerhouse. Remember, Goldman, they're dealing with Wall Street bankers. They're dealing with billion-dollar companies. They don't have experience dealing with the day-to-day street-level consumers. So they had less leverage when they were doing that deal with Apple. Chase, when they're sitting at the table with Apple, they can be more stern with their terms. Let's look at the scores. What might change if this acquisition happens? If you're 700 and above and you're an Apple card holder, you really don't have anything to worry about with JP Morgan Chase taking over, right? Because you're not in the subprime category. So if anything, you're probably still going to get the same sort of credit limits. It may not be as frequent, but you're still probably going to get the same amount because your credit score, your profile is still pretty strong. You may even, and this isn't just me assuming, you may even start to see some better rewards and better incentives on some of these cards. That's just me thinking out loud. If your score is 650 to 700, I will still say, go ahead, just keep the card. Credit limit increases are going to be harder because remember, JP Morgan Chase, Chase's system is more geared toward prime and above. Basically like 680 credit score and above. So if you're coming in there under that 680 threshold, it's not going to be as easy to get the same sort of credit limits and same sort of approvals that we were seeing before, right? It's going to tighten up. And if your score is under 650, the card should remain active. I don't see them doing like a widespread closure. That's probably unlikely. But for new users that are trying to get the Apple Card, once Chase has taken over the underwriting, again, what I said at the top of the video, a lot of the tricks that we learned in that 40-minute video that I showed you guys, the soft pull tricks, the credit limit increase, frequency, all these little tricks that we've been using, highly doubt that's going to work under Chase, right? So let's look at the timeline. This is over 2 years in the making. I'm assuming late 2025, sometime in 2026, possibly, this will be official. And it's probably going to take 6 to 12 months to migrate the cards. So I don't see anything drastically changing with your account for at least like another year and some change. But that does mean that if you're still in the credit building phase, if you don't have the Apple Card, this is probably going to be your best time to go ahead and get the Apple Card with the strategies that I'm going to show you guys. Because by the end of this year, top of next year, these strategies likely are not going to work, or they're not going to work as well. So action plan. So, in all of my videos, especially recently, I want us to get away from just thinking about ideas theoretically, like, okay, this is an interesting idea. No, after every video, I'm giving you guys homework. How can we put this into play? How can we put this into action? Number one, if you are already an Apple Card holder, do a credit limit increase today. Well, before you even do that, go watch my 40-minute video that I dropped on Wednesday of this week. Watch that video and just take the screenshots on your phone as you're watching it and follow the steps that you see in that video. Matter of fact, you can even look in the comments. We're getting a lot of comments now that people are saying, like, yeah, this information is solid. People are giving their data points with Discover and their Apple Card. It works, right? You want to update your income information. Higher income on your file is going to give you guys a better chance. We did a deep dive on debt to income ratio in that video. That's very important. If you don't know what that means, go watch that 40-minute video, guys. It's legit. I'm trying to tell you. You want to put usage on that card and you want to pay down the balances, right? Take advantage of Goldman Sachs still being the underwriter for the card because, again, we don't know how long that's going to last. If you don't have the Apple Card as of right now, I want you to apply like this week. If you want me to record the video that shows you how to get the Apple Card without a hard inquiry, go down into the comments, show some love in there. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, right? I want to make sure that this channel and this content is getting spread out as much as possible. Even if they only give you $500 to $1,000, that's fine. By the time Chase goes ahead and takes over these accounts, you can still get a couple of credit limit increases and get that credit line to be more respectable. You don't always have to swing for the fences and get a $10,000 credit limit when you're applying for these cards. If you only get a few thousand, that's fine. We can still strategically do a few things to your credit profile and get the credit limit increases. It's possible. Right now, we just want to get our foot in the door, especially if you're in the credit building phase, right? So what's the bottom line? What's more than likely going to stay with the acquisition of the Chase card? No annual fee, iPhone app, daily cash, your account. What's probably going to change, there's going to be harder approvals, stricter limits, traditional banking, less flexibility. As more information comes out, we're going to continue to give you guys updates. But as always, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and I'm going to check you guys out in the next video. Oh, by the way, I am getting still more emails from people giving me their case studies of what's going on with their credit profiles. I have about like 6 that I have jotted like some basic notes. So if you sent me an email about your situation, don't worry, I've seen it. I got it. I'm still taking notes. And probably starting next week, after like this whole week, I've been doing videos on credit limit increases, Chase, Apple Card, that strategy. Once I wrap up those two videos, next week I'm going to segue into going back into the case study of your particular situation. So again, you can go down in the comments, or you can send me an email. Let me know what's going on with your situation. What are you struggling with? What are the stumbling blocks that you're running up against and you're not knowing what to do, right? Go down in the comments, and what we can do is do a deep dive, just like I did with the 22-year-old who was trying to file bankruptcy. We actually open that up and we show what are his options, right? So that's what we're going to be doing going forward. Make sure to hit the bell notification, and you're going to see more content like that coming up, all right? Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll see you in the next video, all right? Peace.